Lesson 4, Unit 2. Monitoring results. This is the first step in the monitoring phase, and we begin by first having a clear idea of what the definition of monitoring is. Monitoring is the continuous process of assessing the status of project implementation in relation to the approved project plans and budget. This is the definition that we're going to use in this lesson. The main idea is that monitoring is a continuous process. It doesn't happen just once or twice during the life of the project. Why do you need to monitor the project? The first reason is that you need to learn from experiences to improve any future activities. You also need to show accountability on the resources used and the results obtained. You also need to make informed decisions on the future of the project. Finally, monitoring helps you promote empowerment and ownership of the results in the beneficiaries. Monitoring results helps identify the areas where the project is having problems meeting its goals, and you need to be able to answer these questions. What has been achieved so far? What changed from the approved plans? The plans serve as a guide to implement the project, but there are many factors that could have impacted and deviated the project from the original plans. You also need to identify what can be improved and what has been learned. That will provide the input for the adapting phase, and you and the team start looking for ways to improve the project and make it more effective and efficient in achieving the desired results. In monitoring results, one of the tools that you will use is the project log frame that was developed as part of the project proposal and is used to plan and implement the project. The log frame has 4 levels: the goal, outcome, outputs, and activities. Most of the monitoring will occur at the lower levels. The activity level will be the area where most of the work happens in the project and will require the most effort in monitoring. Then are the outputs. Outputs are the direct results of the activities. It is also important to check if the assumptions are holding at this level. Any changes that are happening in the communities or in the group of beneficiaries need to be monitored to see if they will have an impact on the outputs and their effect on the outcomes. Results on outcomes usually need more time to occur, but for the short-term outcomes, you might have some data that can give you some insight of the short-term results. For the goal, you usually can't see that much information, and it's very difficult for some projects to see if they have been able to make an impact at the goal level, mostly because it takes a long period of time for the goal to be achieved. For most projects, the goal results are only measured at the end of the project, during the evaluation of the project, and to see how the outputs and the outcomes of the project were able to contribute to the final goal. The log frame includes a series of indicators that facilitate the monitoring of results at each level. One of the tools that you can use is a chart to track the performance of each indicator. The chart includes the planned targets for each indicator. These are the values the project is expecting to achieve. As the project makes progress, you collect data from each indicator and you plot it on the chart. The lines in the chart will help you identify the deviations from the plan, the blue line, and the actual data, the red line. This is your monitoring tool that you use as an early warning system to identify significant deviations from the plan and implement corrective actions before it's too late. Here's another view how you can use the indicators to make a chart. In the blue bars are the targets for the indicators. In red is the baseline, or the initial data from which the project is started. In green, the current progress. You can look at the different sectors or groups of beneficiaries marked in letters from A to F to monitor the progress. In this example, the project is 50% complete and the charts show that there is a good progress in some groups, but it also helps identify the groups where progress is not happening as planned. Something is happening in those groups, and those will be the areas where the project manager or the team leader will need to focus and identify changes in the plans or the implementation strategies. The use of charts and other graphs can help identify deviations early in the project and concentrate the focus to solve those problems by the next reporting period. Here's another reason why it's important to monitor indicators. The project completes all the outputs from an outcome. Then the outcomes can fully contribute to achieve the project goal. But when there are outputs that are having problems and they're not complete as planned, they will have a negative impact on the outcome. And an outcome that is not 100% complete might not be able to fully contribute to achieve the goal. In the analysis, you will focus on the causes that are making those outputs late and develop solutions to those problems. You need to monitor if the initial assumptions have changed. Changes in assumptions around the participation of key stakeholders, the contribution of partners, the capacity of the organization, access to resources, any dependencies, and even assumptions about the context. To help in the analysis of the context, you can use the PESTEL analysis that focuses on the political, economic, social, technology, environment, and even legal context where the project is operating. All of them have the capacity to change the original assumptions. Another important area that you need to monitor is risk, and you can use the risk matrix developed in the planning phase. During the monitoring phase, you will meet with the different risk owners and ask them to provide a status on the work they are responsible for managing each risk. The update will give you an idea of the progress made. In the example, you can see that some actions have been started and some risks have been closed. Some might still be open. This is the value of the matrix. It allows a complete view of the risk and the status of the work done to avoid the risk or reduce the impact on the project, especially for the critical risks. When monitoring risk, you need to see if the initial risks have changed in the levels of impact or levels of probability. There might also be new risks or risks that become issues and even residual risk. A residual risk is an important concept. It means that you take actions to avoid the risk, but after you implement those actions, the risk is not fully gone. You just reduce the level of impact. There may be some residual elements of that risk that might still pose a problem to the project. Don't always assume that because you implemented some actions to avoid the risk or reduce the impact that the risk is completely gone. The levels of impact and probability in risks also change over time, which is another important reason to monitor the risk. The original strategies that were identified at the beginning will not work anymore if you try to use them. They might not have a positive effect. For example, you have a risk that originally had a low impact with low probability, but now it changed to high probability and high impact. The original strategy will not work for that risk anymore, and you will need to change the strategies. This is an exercise that needs to happen on a regular basis, especially at the end of each cycle. While monitoring the results, you also need to monitor stakeholders. Each stakeholder was originally identified and categorized by their levels of interest and influence. For a specific group, you identify actions to help increase the levels of interest in the project or change some of the perceptions the stakeholders have on the project. You started building relationships to increase their involvement and participation in the project. During the monitoring phase, you evaluate the results of your efforts and see how they are moving to the desired position. In some cases, the stakeholder responded positively to your actions. In others, they might need more time. Stakeholders can also change their levels of interest and influence in the project. In the planning phase, you identify each stakeholder in this matrix. But as the project makes progress, some stakeholders might have changed, and now they have a different level of interest and influence. The original strategies don't work anymore, and you need to reevaluate the matrix and change the strategies. For example, you're going to see that some stakeholders that had low interest now have high interest, which is good. It means that your strategies had an effect. But you might also find some stakeholders that have lost their interest in the project, so that may create a problem. You might also find that certain stakeholders have increased their levels of influence, so now you need to change your strategy with these stakeholders. You can also identify new stakeholders that you need to add them to the matrix, especially if you have new stakeholders with high influence and low interest. These changes can happen during the life of the project. You need to monitor for changes at regular intervals. Depending on changes in the environment and the dynamic context, the stakeholders are going to be changing, and you need to start adapting your strategies. Monitoring stakeholders is a continuous process. It doesn't happen once or twice during the life of the project.